some visual aid. He's going to talk a little bit about LMC's interest in this and where publishers really are right now. We think that's important for you to hear. And then Joe Kaiser will also talk to you about kind of how ITAGA plays a role in this project, but also what the building blocks of the project are, so that when we go into the privacy policy discussion, you'll have a much better sense of what that is. So, Chris, come on up. Sorry, I talk fast.
Wait with his plane, wait with his presentation.
I don't know. Do you need some help, Chris?
I'm looking for a burner to get on it.
You just need the HDMI.
Yeah, well, I need piece that's very somewhere in my bag.
Can I cover that?
Oh, no.
Can I cover this like that? Okay.
Maybe this is a good time to go over the ground rules.
Oh, sure. Do you want to? Okay. I have a mic. I'm mic'd. Okay, so the ground rules that we discussed yesterday are one person speaks at a time. Raise your hand if you have a question you want to speak. Make sure that there's no racist or inflammatory or gendered, maybe, language. Also, make sure that you're not acting in sort of a threatening manner. I didn't see anything even close to this yesterday, but just to kind of remind you that those are important parts of it. Also, we're going to have the parking lot active again, which is a place where if we veer off topic, which is very easy to do in this type of complexity, we'll put it over there and we'll discuss it a little bit later.
The other point is that we're being live streamed, and so this mic is not, obviously is not projecting. So on the one hand, you need to project into the room, but you also need to use the mic so that people on the live stream for now and later can hear you.
Yeah, great.
Is there any information on the number of viewers?
No.
Is it greater than 0?
I mean, part of the live stream is that I don't know if we have any now, but we're definitely going to archive it, so it's available.
Yesterday's streams were already archived, and the point of the stream is to be transparent about what we're doing here and to create that archive. And if there are people watching, that's great, but that's not the primary objective.
Yep. Okay. Guess not. I think he might not have been able to. I think he may not have been able to stay tonight. Or.
Taking the time to allow me the time. Yeah, last night we were talking about, I guess, at the bar, if you want to call it that, in the hotel, and they asked the question of why, and that question was prevalent in some of the questions that were around the room today. Why is the LMC interested in doing this for itself and for the industry? Many of the folks in this room, I apologize, have seen some of this deck. I tried to condense it last night. It was much longer. Some of the people in this room know the story of why. Sorry about that. You're going to be told again. Some of you don't know why, don't know what the LMC is. That's an assumption we made. That was a bad assumption. I think this is what was coming in here for the first time. So there's a deck that addresses why we want to do this, who we are, and some other of the issues that will kind of tie this together for you. So bear with me through this. So the LMC is committed to basically reducing costs and finding revenue opportunities for its membership at scale, and that's so that we can help fund the sustainability of journalism. That's the simplest thing I can say about it. It's a for-profit, non-equity S corp. Oh, sorry. It was designed that way deliberately so that nobody, if it did create tremendous value, nobody could control it and make it do something or sell it. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. It's built on the premise of one company, one vote, a true democracy. It doesn't matter what size your company is. If you have 100 news outlets, it doesn't matter. You get one vote, just like a company that has one outlet. It's a dues-supported entity. It has a 10-person board that directs it. Fran is the CEO. I am the president. We have now a 7-person staff that actually executes on behalf of the membership. We are 80-plus holding companies. We have broadcast television, newspapers, digital-only members, as well as radio. This is where we all work collaboratively together. So The people in here, I call them kind of the cult of the willing. These are folks who historically may have competed against each other, still do compete against each other, but now understand that the need for us to circle the wagons is very important, and they're willing to step into it together and drop all that competitive legacy kind of competition aspect of what we do. So it's 2,200 plus local media outlets that we represent. It's pretty formidable from a legacy standpoint, and we'll get to the number in a minute of what we do in a digital footprint standpoint. And that's 170 million monthly unique visitors. That's pretty good. That puts us in 54 total around the globe, number 54 according to ComScore. And in the news media category, it puts us at number 5, consistently between 1 and 7. From a competitive standpoint, that's good. We do operate on one platform. DFP is an ad serving environment. We have, it's kind of just a state where we're all on it together. We do trade together in the exchanges programmatically and direct buys together, but we also execute locally. It's 15 billion ad impressions a month. We have Google's attention. We deal with Google on a weekly basis with some of the senior executives there because of the scale of this thing. We're always getting pinged by the other providers of services. It allows us to get good conversations with Facebook, Reddit, all the major platforms because it is scaled and it is an area where they don't have to spend time going from media property to try to get alignment. So that's the size of it. It's 65.3% reach in the US, which is pretty good. These are some of the partnerships we do have. There's a lot of them. We continue to grow the partnerships. We craft deals that are one deal for everyone. Just because you're big, you don't get a better deal than a small guy. Everyone in the ecosystem who plays with us gets the same exact deal. The terms are scaled. There's a most favored nation clause in them that protects us from someone outside getting the same or better deal. It's a part of our membership promise to our members. The larger ones that we have in place are Google is probably the most extensive. It cuts across all of their product suite, cuts across all of their pilot projects, all sorts of stuff that we're involved in. Facebook we work with on a regular basis, as well as now Reddit and Monster also. Those are the more formidable relationships that we do have. So our challenge is, right now what we're looking at, we see in the environment is, there was a feeling yesterday I got that some people think we're in, totally dire circumstances as far as digital concerns are, and we are kind of. We're seeing the revenues that are declining or flat year over year for the first time in a long time. It's hard to get to double digit. There's a couple of reasons why. It's not that we're not selling or that we're not getting the ad buys. The CPMs are declining, as well as there's lots of programmatic buys that are coming in lower and lower to us. Those are eroding at a quick rate year over year. There's an over-reliance amongst publishers on digital display revenue. That is why you're seeing this year being the year of subscription. Trying to diversify the portfolio and move away from this arena of digital display. There's plenty of data leakage to middlemen. That's our own fault. It's a self-inflicted wound. We were probably one of the worst at protecting ourselves. And you got these companies that come and put their widgets on your pages, their analytics trackers on your page, their ads come with it. And we don't police ourselves well enough, and we let them just steal the data, and then we get garbage back as far as revenue is concerned because they make the revenue elsewhere. We need to stop that. That's part of this effort. Our challenge is local doesn't scale well. People have told me, well, why don't the local markets sell? Because they don't have enough traffic locally to attract enough eyeballs. When you get into targeting and you get into a small market, the targets get smaller and smaller, and no one is interested in a target of 5 people. So that's a local publisher's problem, but at scale what we know is that at scale in a given market, not under a given brand, we do have scale in the local marketplace, and that's one of the benefits of being in the local media consortium is that you get to now open up and be scaled in the local marketplace. And then now another challenge that we see is in front of us is privacy legislation, and that's part of this conversation that we're in now, where one individual publisher is not going to tackle this problem, but we collectively, the LMC, can help move along publishers to understand and use this as an advantage to us. Are publishers really ready for this? I don't think so right now. I think this group is going to help us get ready for it and help us formulate a strategy around it. We all know this, that consent is a requirement when using the consumer data today. Interesting thing here is that people, not cookies, machines, or devices give you consent. We don't have a people-based strategy. We're working on that. We have a strategy right now that's pretty much device-based, but that's not going to give us consent. So we really have to have a strategy around that, and I'll speak to that in a minute. Much of this is about that email as being that. So we want to get away from devices. This is an interesting one. She actually said this. And we kind of have a first-party strategy, but we don't have a first-party strategy at scale. We're working on that too. But this is the truth. This is one of the other things that's killing us, is that our first-party strategy for publishers is pretty much localized. And we have to find a way to make it scaled. But we have to do it the right way. It's easy to do it the wrong way. Facebook, the money shot here on this is the last sentence, where in 2017, Facebook reported advertising revenue in the U.S. of $40 billion. The U.S. newspaper industry was less than half of that in aggregate, and that's print and digital. That's the entire industry. So this is a problem. We know there's money out there. We're just not getting it. So here's our potential path. We believe that people, the best proxy that we can see right now for people is an email address. Now, you could argue all day long that it can be spoofed, it can be faked, yes, but it's better than a device ID. So if we formulate a strategy and use email as a gateway drug to people and consent and cross-platform first-party data, we believe there's a win in there for publishers. Constructing this and doing it right with an overlay of a consumer-friendly policy around privacy and data is core to this. So what's next for us? We set a goal. It's just pull it out of the air. It's a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal of 150 million email addresses. But really, it's 150 million people we're after. Now, we know that we talked earlier about 170 million unique visitors. I don't know what that is in terms of actual users, but even if it's half, I'll take that. I mean, of people, because we know ComScore's flawed. But the long game is that we want to develop a scaled, privacy-friendly, people-based marketing graph to advantage publishers and consumers, both. That's the long game as we see it. Yeah, we're struggling because we're on the open web, but I still believe that this can be done with the brain power in this room and others involved. So what does it look like? As I said, 150 million people in some sort of good consent framework that sits with it. Safe tracking technology across participating properties. This is all we talked about all this yesterday. In the middle, you see all the data sources and data things that are sitting on it right here. And then over here, if we can do that, we have leverage back against the DSPs if we want it. It's our choice. Or, that network's pretty big, or we can just set up a NewCo and become a neutrally controlled ad tech DSP or SSP if we want to. This is already being executed through the Ozone project on a smaller scale in Europe, which is I think it's the Telegraph. You can help me out here. Where's Guardian, right. And Danny Spears left the Guardian to go work on this project, but they're using the old Revive and OpenX platform source code to develop their own ad server to get out of the grip of our friends at Google. So it can be done. We're coming at it from the other side, which is the consent, this side way over here. We're coming at it from here first, saying, what's the consent framework look like? Then what's the tech look like? What's in the data look like in it and how it's transported. And then over here, we'll decide what we do, whether we just leverage back against the DSPs, create our own instance of it and move forward, or potentially partner with those guys over there because they're open to it and they want to put whatever they create into some kind of safe environment so nobody can take advantage of it down the road also. So we've already had it. Fran and I had a conversation with Danny, last month? Is that right? Yep. And we're going to continue that conversation. So that's it in a nutshell, but here's what it really looks like when I talk about the scale, that game to get in it, if we can do this right, and why we'd be an advantage with a consent framework that's workable for everybody and not just one-sided. This is what we talk about when we talk about unique visitors or unique monthly traffic or audience, if you will. This is the scale of it. If we can get to 150 million, well, we're not as big as Facebook. They're at 214 million. XYZ.com is just mail. And you say, well, why is it bigger at Facebook than the actual mail environment? That's because there's Russian trolls and business and all sorts of crap in there, but whatever. And Google has about 140 million active Gmail accounts in any given month. Amazon is a business that's based on 100 million people. And Twitter's at 68 million monthly. So if we can do this, we're in the game. Our problem today is that we're not in this game. We have this, but it's not tied together. And that's one of the things we're trying to do is tie it together, but tie it together in a manner that advantages us and protects consumers. That's it. So what's next for us? Continue to find the cult of the willing and create a plan and go. So hopefully that's helpful to people. I know I went through that quickly because this wasn't supposed to be part of the agenda, but now it was. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right. right, no. No, the good news is probably everybody understood this, but now that everybody's seen it, you know our perspective. All right.
The visuals help?
Yeah.
And I better take that.
He was good. He slipped that in my pocket, and I didn't even know it.
I know, look at that. All right. So, let's see, is this thing on? No, this is supposed to be the right one. No, that one doesn't work. I'm not getting my slides up. So I'll
Yeah. I saw
why is it not? I'm not. So what you'll find out, I'm Joellen Green-Kaiser, and I'm the board chair of ITEGA. Hello again. And what you'll find out is that I am not good at PowerPoint, unlike Chris. So hopefully that will be fine, because what I have to say is pretty straightforward. I'm trying to explain what ITEGA is and why we got what we're doing to help the Local Media Consortium. There we go. Thank you. That was great. So ITEGA is the Information Trust Exchange Governing Association, and what we care about is trust, identity, and privacy. And Bill Densmore founded us, and he started with a really simple question, which is, how are we going to save publishing? The idea is that publishers need more revenue. What do we have to do why are publishers not getting that revenue, and what do we have to do to fix it? And it was clear, we all know the revenue was swallowed up by Google and Facebook and their ad machine. When Bill looked at it deeply, he realized that the reason that Google and Facebook are so successful is because they have hold of user data. And the user data allows advertising to be targeted and personalized, and advertisers would rather go there than go to publishers where they don't know what they're getting. So that was like, okay, user data is at the heart of this, but just creating a new Google or Facebook is not a good solution if what we care about is people. We want to protect people's privacy. We want to protect their identity. And we believe that the only way that publishers will succeed is to be in an environment around trust. And that's true if we look at the way that publishers are gaining revenue in the new system. Increasingly, publishers are gaining revenue through membership. And the way that works is that the publisher is providing high-quality content in a trusted environment. And part of that trust has got to be a guarantee around user privacy. And as a result, the user is providing information about who they are with their membership. So when you subscribe or become a member to the New York Times or the Guardian, you're giving the Times or the Guardian your membership, your identity information, your email address, and sometimes your snail address. Often you're giving other kinds of attributes about, you're signing up for verticals, vertical like the Wirecutter. And you are assuming that the publisher is guaranteeing your privacy, but right now those assumptions aren't actually explicit. And so the question would be, membership revenue, it would be even better if there were explicit guarantees around user privacy. And so here we see the relationship identity, trust, privacy for membership revenue. That's also true for advertising revenue. It's not been true in the past, but the idea would be that if we really want to be able to create the right environment for advertising, which is around targeted, personalized ads, they're going to need user attributes and activities. But if we want to do that within a framework of trust, then we have to respect user privacy. This is not even talking about laws like GDPR and so forth. We're saying if we want to create this, if we really want to have this new relationship with our users, then we have to be able to respect their privacy. And that's really what ITEGA is setting out to do. So that's the task that we wanted, that's our task, is to say, how do we create this system? How do we create a system where users are willing to give publishers their individual attributes, their activities, their identity, knowing that they can trust publishers to protect their privacy. And to do that, I mean, what we're coming to is the idea that we're going to have a stack of different technologies and different, along with some policies. And we're going to need browsers that, yesterday Don talked about the importance of incentivizing this kind of environment. And browsers can help incentivize the environment by restricting ad tech and supporting privacy. And so one of the things ITEGA wants to do is support and promote those kind of browsers. We need ad servers that start from a privacy posture. And so one of the questions is, can we negotiate with Google, which has the main ad server, and say, Google, you need to provide advertisers like the LMC with an ad server that starts from a privacy posture, or do we have to somehow build our own ad server like Ozone? We need a federated authentication system so we can build a means for trusted partners to collect permissioned individual attributes, an opt-in system. And the idea is that it would be federated. The idea is that there wouldn't be a honeypot. There wouldn't be one place where all these individual attributes would be collected. It would be that a trusted partner, whether it was like a particular publisher or it could be somebody else besides a publisher, but in the LMC context, it would be a publisher like you know, the Lexington Herald Leader or something would say, hey, you live in Lexington, Kentucky, you can trust us with your identity. We have privacy policy that's really strong. We are part of a larger system that also has a really strong privacy policy. You can trust us with your personal email and also maybe attributes about you, like the fact that you're interested in car buying or you like horses if you're in Kentucky. And we will keep that, we will keep your information private. We won't sell it to third parties. And then we want to build or support user data exchanges that pool specific permissioned activities. So we might ask that person in Kentucky who likes horses, would you like to get more content about horses? Would you like to see advertisements about horses, et cetera? And if they say yes, then they could go into a data exchange that would then allow them to see content and advertising related to the activities that they participate in. And so there are all kinds of ways to think about that user data exchange. There's all kinds of ways that we could get permissions. And you can see it becomes very complex. There could be more than one user data exchange. It's not clear to ITEGA if, for the LMC, if we need to build a specific LMC user data exchange or if there are ones out there that we're going to be able to use. There are a lot of questions around this. And the final piece is, without having a strong, number one, privacy policies that really lock in and this promise to the user around trust, we need to have that. And the other thing we need is we're going to need governance. And ITEGA is a nonprofit, and our goal is to provide governance around the system, because if players start making promises that they don't keep, we have to have a way of censoring them. We have to have, there has to be some kind of stick along with a carrot. And so ITAGA is the organization that provides the carrot and stick, and so that's what we're here to do. Today we're looking at how do we build the privacy policy, and how do we start thinking about the ad tech that's needed to create this ecosystem. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Obviously, I'm hoping that this is confusing and complex because there's a lot of work to be done. Yes?
Does this help people kind of
I mean, in this hypothetical future, like, careers might literally build all these things.
Oh, sorry. Let's get the mic.
With some of these that build, I'm curious what the thinking is about, like, who might actually be building this and what would be the incentives for getting them to build this.
Yeah, so some of the stuff is already built. Like that's why Don's here from Mozilla. The browser work is already happening, and Apple with Safari is already working on that. In terms of the federated authentication networks, Scott Bradner is one of our board members, and he helped build Shibboleth, which is used by academics. And there are examples out there of federated systems, and the question is whether they can be modified for what we want to do. There are user data exchanges being built. David here is building Meridio, which is a user data exchange, and there are others that are being thought about. So these things are all in process. It's not clear whether ITAGA will need to build anything. Honestly, as a board chair, I do not want to build any tech. I would rather certify tech that's already out there. And one of the things that we're hoping is actually that this will be a new kind of business opportunity. That just like when the internet started, it opened up all kinds of business opportunities. When ad tech started, it opened up all kinds of business opportunities. We're actually hoping that a really strong privacy regime will open up business opportunities for the good players who right now are really excluded. We're hoping that it will actually create really great opportunities, for capitalism to move into the space, but in the right way.
I was just going to say, I yield my time to the gentleman from California. You should be hearing more about Meridio.
Yeah, good.
Well, yeah, I mean, real quick, the background on Meridio is that I guess the idea was that if there were to exist a content or a data exchange that had a business model that facilitated transactions between publishers, my hope would be that would be a not-for-profit business model. And then I thought it would be interesting if Mozilla got really involved, because if this thing were to exist and it had a scalable, sustainable, although not-for-profit business model, it would also benefit by having a fundamentally trusted brand reputation in the industry because it was handling user data in some way. And so we reached out to Mozilla to see if there was interest through the foundation and also the corporation in pursuing the idea of developing this as a service. And where we're at right now, Craig Newmark has been, basically bankrolling my efforts to evaluate this this concept as a fellow of Mozilla, working in association with the World Economic Forum, which was the original entity that I went to talk about all this stuff because of prior relationships there, and their interest was really in the possibility of taking this concept and applying it to industries beyond the news business. And so the initial conversations over the last year and a half have been facilitated by the World Economic Forum here in the U.S. and in Europe.
And then when it came time to developing a plan to actually build and test and iterate, then we looped in Mozilla. There's obviously a lot more emphasis for this concept in the European market because GDPR is such a helpful forcing function. But California is right behind them, and so the market is responding well. To date, my conversations around these concepts have been primarily with senior level leadership at international publishing groups, who are also government entities, the data protection authorities of different countries, and also the EDPS agency within the EU in Brussels. Yeah, Meridio would be basically two things. One would be if there isn't already one in the world, an open source project to define a user data schema that hopefully would benefit from the work that's being discussed here in terms of a consent framework, as well as a kind of I would love it if what Chris is interested in, like this industry standard terms of service, actually mapped to that consent framework. That would be so incredibly helpful to me. And is upstream in the user flow of the data as we're envisioning it. So there would be some open source project to define a user data schema that could be traded across a user data exchange as a nonprofit business that was architected in a way to support revocation, because as we discussed yesterday, it's not possible to abide by the GDPR law currently. And so we need to actually have a system that allows for revocation in a way that is discrete, as some of the things that were discussed yesterday, granular enough to respect that user's right as represented in GDPR, but also granular enough to not blow up the entire value of a user data string unnecessarily. And so there's a real fine needle to kind of thread there, but it's exciting times. There's some pretty good conversations, and so right now, I'm working with Mozilla to put together a more detailed plan that we take to different governments, primarily in Europe, maybe also the Canadian government, but then also publishing groups in Europe to raise significant capital to start building the infrastructure for this, probably sometime at the end of this year and into 2020.
So you can see these things are on their way.
Any questions?
So, Dave, in a nutshell, the Meridio project is technology that would support consumer consent and a data exchange?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm interested in is building that marketplace for publishers to trade data. Now, in order for that to be the right thing to do, there needs to be a robust consent framework that has some kind of universality in terms of its acceptance across the industry, which would benefit from a standard terms of use across the industry. But the Meridio project itself would really be that marketplace because the thing is that we spend a lot of time talking about how the world should work, like how should we as a society with this industry that harnesses user data for the sake of monetization, how should that work? And I think the vision for how it should work is becoming more and more clear. Then the question becomes, how do you get the world to work that way? And so the second question is usually where great visions fall. And so what we're trying to do with Meridio is establish a marketplace that presents economic incentives that allow for the scalability of a vision. And so it's not enough to know how the world should work, it's how can we get the world to work that way, and I'm a big believer in economics. Now, like being American, I tend to rely on economics over regulation, but when there is rigorous regulation, like in the European market, it can sometimes be very helpful. And so my interaction with like the EU or the UK government, I'm like, you guys are, crazy regulators over here, but it's been really helpful. And so GDPR is a very useful forcing function. There are other regulations that I wish they wouldn't pursue in those markets, but as far as this one's concerned, it presents, in that case, it's a public policy agenda that ends up presenting economic incentives that then I can leverage if we have the technologies to take advantage of those economic incentives. And so like everything that I work on is for the purpose of establishing a viable economic framework to support journalism in the digital economy. That has to do with distribution, it has to do with user data, and it has to do with what are the technologies that need to be built in order to establish a new economic framework that drives quality content to scale through economic incentives. And rather than through necessarily regulation, but as I said, sometimes regulation is a helpful forcing function. I don't know if that answers the question.
Dave, will Meridio be responsive to the e-privacy regulation, if it ever actually comes into force?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that, well, let's answer in a really abstract way. So for a long time, I think we as, in the industry have been talking about the role that users could play in having agency over their data. And I think that those are always really good conversations, except like all visions without execution, there's been no place for a user to go to have that kind of agency over their data. Mm-hmm. And so there's been no unified infrastructure that would allow for a consumer application to present a user experience that would give them actual, tangible agency. And so one of the things that would be, if we were to wave our magic wand and we had this kind of global, user data exchange, then we would actually have an infrastructure that we could provide a UI to users that would provide some tangible agency. And so from the the perspective of like how does a user gain more control over their data, the first step is how do we have a system that would give them that, and then we can figure out all of the details. But
okay,
I mean, but it's not So yeah,
it's confusing and hard to interpret.
Right,
and,
right. So the short answer is yes, but the long answer is like, super complicated.
Yeah, no, I understand. And Joe, I know, has done a lot of analysis, I guess, of the e-privacy reg. It's not? Okay. It deals with a lot of marketing entities, let's say. So, any questions? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was up. He was past the microphone.
Oh, okay. Justin has a question. Go ahead.
Sorry, I brought this question up yesterday, but I still don't understand it. I'm still curious about what data we're talking about. Because again, like the fact that I saw the weather on the Las Vegas newspaper site, or I checked the heat box score on the Miami Herald, like you're sharing that is already a little bit confusing, but I also don't see a path to monetization. And then I saw one of the slides, and it said smart TV data, append data, everything else, social data.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sorry, who's going to consent to that? I mean, if you're just recreating crappy GDPR consent flows and getting people to agree to share everything, it seems like a disconnect between the idea that we need to do this in a very privacy-preserving way. So I still don't quite understand what the vision is.
What?
Care if you track me all day long. And there are people like me. Now, I'm in here arguing on the other side of it because me personally, I don't care. But I do understand the other side of folks who should have the ability to lever it the way they want to lever it. So that's what I'm saying. I believe, that data is valuable to someone. And the other side of the coin is that the advertising community is going to tell us, too, what they need. And then we're going to say, okay, to the publishers, this is what they need. And then we're going to say to the consumers, are you willing to give this up to make this ecosystem work? And if at scale they're not, then that's okay. That's the right answer because that's what the consumers want. But if there are segments who are willing to go ahead and make that trade and someone can make a commercial business on it, that's fine.
So, and my answer to that would be a lot of it depends on the privacy policy, which is not something I've ever said probably. But I think in this scenario, the rules matter, which is why the next discussion will be about privacy values. So the policy's got to match this ethical framework, and any data that falls under that we would consider negatively impacting a person, I at least would advocate for not collecting it at all. And in fact, there's a value of limited collection. So there's a balance, right? That's the name of this. There's the advertisers are going to tell us what, minimum attributes or whatever, what kind of data they want about the person. And LMC is going to decide with its members and with me, like breathing down their neck, that what that can be. What's the minimum, right? And it might just be an email. Maybe the minimum is email and location. And so asking how we ask somebody, whether we ask somebody, all of that is going to matter in terms of the rules, right?
In terms of questions, it was the woman from Access Now, Don, Sean.
Amy, Chris, Don, and Sean.
Oh, and sorry.
I got you, Chris.
Amy, Chris. Oh, sorry. Amy, Chris.
Based on reactions, I want to caution about this being potentially predatory. There are communities that are more likely to say, I will give up my data in order to get a free product. Those are the communities that we need to be protecting the privacy of the most. There are other communities who may not care about their data, but privacy is not about a single person. It's about communities and protecting the whole. And so when you're providing those sort of monetary trade-offs, they often become super predatory. And I'm breaching a little bit into the next conversation because it's interesting on the privacy values that you put in front of us. Number one is privacy is a fundamental human right, but that stems from a sentence in the introduction that says you can give it up in order to receive a free service. And I don't know if those two ideas are necessarily can exist in the same world. I actually think that they are fundamentally not able to. Okay.
We'll get into it.
So we did have the same reaction. But my reaction came out a little differently in that I'm concerned about the predatory side of it, but also if we're talking about content, especially local news, which I've been really focused on, and I've been told by people here, okay, broaden your thinking, which I will try to do. But when you're thinking about local news, many consumers are already paying for it. They're paying through subscriptions. People are willing to pay for news. And it seems like we're talking about, what else are people willing to give up? And so when you add that to the concern about, vulnerable populations, at what point do they have an option to opt out from, this important service that people already show that they value is another way to come at it.
So we have to be pretty clear that user permissioned data collection is never going to collect a large enough quantity of data to compete one-on-one with conventional ad tech. Right now, there are a lot of sources of user data that's been taken without permission, either through deception or just click OK or other ways of obtaining user data without permission. And so going in and offering user permitted data sharing as a direct competitor to that is a complete no-go. So we can't come out and say, in the world of ad tech, please choose user permission data. We have to give up on that. That's why it's a two-part strategy. Part one, build user permitted data sharing. Part two, build and heavily incentivize the use of protection from deceptive and unpermitted data sharing. User permitted data sharing will not work in the absence of privacy technology that users trust to protect themselves from the other stuff. So when the ad agencies come and say, why should we deal with you? We can go get data from some creepy nerd in a hoodie. Then the answer to that is, well, here's the technology that our audience trusts, along with our trusted sites, to protect them from their data being shared that way. you can get real user data from us with permission, or if you want to play the conventional ad tech game, you can go get bot data. That's the choice. It's not selling permitted data head-to-head with unpermitted data.
I hear that, and the hard thing about, well, for me anyway, thinking about practically, how do you handle a marginalized population or population that stands to lose more from loss of privacy? And I'm not sure what the answer is, right? Because we can collect demographic or zip code or financial. I mean, how do you even know which population you're talking about, right? And so, is there an answer to some access but not all access, which also seems weird? So, in some ways, the sort of practical business reality of small publishers trying to monetize, I think this is going to be a part of it, but I don't have an answer. Do you?
Well, Michelle,
yeah.
One of the reasons I got into ITEGA is I actually, as I've told people, I don't actually care about ad revenue. I work with small publishers, especially publishers that are people of color who are working with communities that are low income, communities that are made up of people who are more vulnerable. And that's where my work has been. And what I see now is I see a current marketplace where everybody's data is being used indiscriminately. And everybody is being like run over all the time, especially through the platforms. And what ITEGA is trying to create is a marketplace and a system where privacy is the ground rule, where the ground rule is around privacy and around asking permission for data use. Now, that is not going to solve the problem of the most vulnerable because, as Mark said yesterday, content isn't free. And so even if publishers put out content that you don't have to pay for, publishers still need to get money for it in some way because they have to pay journalists, they have to pay editors, they have to pay for their whole system. And so saying that unless we had, the only time that content is free in that way is like when governments do it through tax revenue, and then you have the problem of government and media. So I don't think there's any way to get to a perfect system where people aren't going to be taken advantage of in some way, but at least we can make a system where the ways in which people's data is used is super crystal clear. And we can educate, and then we have an education issue where we can educate people and say to them, these are the choices that you're making, and people can also push back against certain choices. So we could actually have an environment in which we said, actually, it's not okay for anyone to ask for X type of data. But we can't even start having that conversation until we're in a world in which privacy, you start from privacy. So that's where I come from.
And, at least from my perspective, I have no intention of creating a crappy GDPR consent-like framework. It can comply with GDPR, I think, and still be visually, or, the UX design can make it much easier. If it's available in like a traffic light type visual that follows you, so you can change it, you can adjust it, you can tell it to go away. There's a sort of constant nudge that you have control over this. And that's ultimately the goal. So, to say like accept cookies and, sort of the dismiss kind of things, that isn't at all what I think we're trying to achieve. So that's just my perspective.
Should we move to the chat?
Oh, well, I think we were going to, do you want to talk about the privacy stuff first? Yeah. So we're a little bit off agenda. That's why we're talking about, I think what we can do maybe for the next half hour is look over the privacy value statement that I think if you don't have it, let me know and we can send it to you. And we'll have a brief discussion about it. And then later when we go into small issue groups, we can distill that more. Because at 11:30 we have the tech discussion led by Don Marty. At 10:30 we have Jeff Jarvis speaking to us. So since we kind of started talking about this anyway, let's just take a few minutes to look that over. And just as I have written on there, the idea here is to create an ethical framework for this. And the reason that I've done this after years of reading privacy policies and criticizing them, et cetera, is if you just start writing down what you can and can't do, you end up, especially across a bunch of entities, you end up with a lot of questions about what's okay. A reminder is a project that I did with Fitbit. There were so many questions in between the policies. Like, what about this? How do we deal with this kind of data? What if we can use steps to determine disease? Do we tell somebody who doesn't want to know that or hasn't asked to know that? Those types of ethical dilemmas happen quite a bit, I think, with data. So this is a way to set sort of the ethical framework, the values that will guide the LMC members, and then that will be translated into a global privacy policy. Okay. And if you can, maybe cluster in small groups, people near you or around you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to start this conversation in small groups because I think that will give everyone more access to really speaking their minds about what's going on without, having to use the mic and so forth. So if you could get into groups of 5, just move and get into groups of 5 and just discuss the privacy policy, the values, whatever comes to your mind, and then we'll reconvene in a larger group. Take like 10 minutes.
And also, if you want to move your group out into the hallway or into any open space, we were told yesterday by New York City Media Lab we're welcome to roam the floor. Okay. So if you want to move someplace quiet, do so.